What has this great man got to do with this great man's Violin Concerto No. 3 in E major? Join me as we step through the 20th century history of an amazing violin maestro, Henryk Szeryng. And I'd like to start by mentioning a Szeryng quote. He once said, "I consider music as the noblest language, bringing comfort, joy, inspiration, and peace to mankind. I think it's vital that peace be preserved, and if music can help, then let's have music." An awesome quote from this very fine aristocratic musician. Henryk Szeryng was a renowned violinist and pedagogue. Let's go through the key events of his life. Henryk Boleslaw Szeryng was born on the 22nd of September 1918 in Żelazowa Wola, I hope I pronounced that right, in Poland. Interesting fact, Henryk Szeryng and Frédéric Chopin share the same birthplace, Żelazowa Wola in Poland. He was a Polish-Mexican violinist, and it appears that he was born the same year as Ruggiero Ricci, and died on the 3rd of March 1988 in Kassel. Szeryng was born into a wealthy industrialist Jewish family. The surname Szeryng is a Polish transliteration of his Yiddish surname, which nowadays would be spelled Szeryng in the modern Yiddish to English transliteration. His father was a man of uncommon enterprise, and his mother an accomplished pianist. Szeryng started piano and harmony lessons with his mother when he was 5, but at age 7 turned to the violin, receiving instruction from Maurice Frankel, who himself was a student of the great Leopold Auer in St. Petersburg. Szeryng did, however, retain his love for piano all his life, which he continued to play competently. In 1928, he was convinced by Bronislaw Huberman, a friend of the family, to go to Germany to study, and so he went to Berlin to study under Karl Flesch. Szeryng credits Huberman for him deciding to become a violinist. Szeryng played the Mendelssohn Concerto for Huberman, and at that point Huberman was super impressed by the young boy. In actual fact, Szeryng had spent a year with Willy Hess before switching to Karl Flesch. After studying with Karl Flesch in Berlin between 1929 and 1932, some other Karl Flesch students who were in the same class with Szeryng, Arrigo Pelliccia, Roman Totenberg, Henry Temianka, Joseph Wolfstahl, Ida Handel, and Rychorod Odnoposov. Some other students of note of Karl Flesch include Max Rostel, Bronislaw Gimpel, Alma Moody, Joseph Hasid, Ginette Neveu, amongst others, who studied with the great pedagogue Karl Flesch. Some insights into Karl Flesch. As Szeryng remembered, to study with such an eminent teacher had a great impact on me. Not only can you get so much advice from him, but you can also enrich your knowledge by listening to his truly brilliant students. Szeryng always remembered Flesch as a disciplinarian, a technician, and acknowledged that everything I know violinistically speaking I learned from him. Apparently Flesch did have a difficult personality, but he had the ability to select the very best in exercises and technical studies that would help to develop the fingers of the left hand. According to Szeryng, he analysed violin technique in such a thorough, meticulous way that there was nothing left to chance. For Szeryng, Flesch was also a great violinist. His playing was excellent, secure, perfect. Each time he took his instrument and played a work for a student to explain his remarks on the student's performance, you would have said that he must have been practicing at least a week or a fortnight. This was part of his greatness. Yet when the student was playing, he was making notes very quickly in his own signs, very easy to explain, very logical. Then he analysed with the student what he had to criticise in front of all the fellow students. He went on to Paris to continue his studies with Jacques Thibault at the Conservatoire, graduating with the Premier Prix in 1937. And some insights on the effects of French teachers on Szeryng. Further instruction in the French school from Jacques Thibault and Gabriel Bouillon in Paris brought a sheen to Szeryng's tone and a refinement to his phrasing, according to Strings magazine. He studied with Gabriel Bouillon for 9 months. He met and performed with Mademoiselle Bertellier, the daughter of blind violinist Henri Bertellier, who counted Fritz Kreisler as one of his admirers. So the daughter of Bertellier introduced Szeryng to the then contemporary French sonata repertoire. Szeryng stated, "I learned even more from her about the French musical spirit than I did from Bouillon." Szeryng made his solo debut on the 6th of January 1933, playing the Brahms Violin Concerto with the Warsaw Philharmonic Orchestra under Romanian conductor George Georgescu. On the 17th of December 1933, he first appeared on stage in Paris. Once again, he performed the Brahms Violin Concerto at the Salle Pleyel under Pierre Monteux. In the same year, he played in Bucharest and Vienna, achieving acclaim from both the audience and the critics. Between the years 1933 to 1939 in Paris, the artist continued to learn violin under Jacques Thibault and Gabriel Bouillon and studied composition under Nadia Boulanger. When World War II broke out, General Władysław Sikorski, the premier of the Polish government in exile, asked Szeryng, who was fluent in 7 languages, to serve as his liaison officer and interpreter. Szeryng took these positions and discontinued his studies, although he continued to perform on the violin, giving over 300 concerts for Allied troops all over the world. That includes in army camps and field hospitals. He had moved to London at this time. Hence, Szeryng's cosmopolitan upbringing became useful during World War II. And if you're interested in knowing what languages he was fluent in, all acquired before the age of 21, these are Spanish, Polish, German, English, French, Italian, and Portuguese. So somewhat of a linguistic genius, a genius in languages. That's not uncommon among violinists to know, well, perhaps 7 is, but many violinists speak many languages, and no doubt the musical training must give them an edge. When he accompanied Sikorski on a mission to Mexico in 1941, seeking a home for 4,000 Polish refugees, the positive reception moved Szeryng so deeply that he decided to become a Mexican naturalized citizen, and he did so in 1946. In 1945, he accepted the request made 2 years earlier in 1943 that he head the string department of the National University of Mexico. He travelled on a Mexican diplomatic passport bearing the title Cultural Ambassador. In later years, he would keep homes in Monte Carlo, Paris, and his adopted Mexico. Reflecting on the war years, Szeryng said in an interview with the New York Times in 1983, "These were very beautiful years in a way. I learned that music is not only a magnificent discipline, but that it can attenuate mental and physical pain and can bring people together. During the war, I promised myself, as long as I live, that I would try to bring people together." 1954 proved to be a highly important year for Henryk Szeryng, because in that year the pianist Artur Rubinstein, also a Jewish refugee from Poland, gave a concert in Mexico City. Szeryng saw him backstage afterwards and accepted Rubinstein's invitation to come to his hotel to play music. That led to Rubinstein being moved to tears when he heard Szeryng's playing of the solo violin music of Johann Sebastian Bach. Rubinstein said, "Real music lovers want emotion, great moments, which Szeryng's playing gives them." So from that point, Rubinstein encouraged Szeryng to begin concertizing again and introduced him to the famous impresario Sol Hurok to help achieve this end. Szeryng's New York debut in 1956 was a resounding success and established him as one of the great violinists of the 20th century. Concert promoter Sol Hurok booked him on a 20-city concert tour in 1957, and Szeryng went on to perform in some 65 countries to universal acclaim. Interestingly, Szeryng was already 36 when he met Rubinstein, older than even Isai, who was 32. When he gained true international recognition. So quite late in life, relatively speaking for a violinist, is when his career really started to take off. Rubinstein and Szeryng would make music together regularly for the rest of their careers and recorded much of the classic chamber music literature either as a duo or a trio with cellist Pierre Fournier. In 1964, he began a collaborative partnership with the pianist Charles Reiner. Together they made 35 records and performed in more than 900 concerts internationally. Recordings with leading orchestras followed, including the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto with the Boston Symphony Orchestra and the Brahms Violin Concerto with the London Symphony Orchestra. Szeryng was a brilliant new find with a polished technique and considerable feeling, wrote Billboard in a 1959 review of the Brahms album. From 1954, when he returned to stages, he started to play with the most famous orchestras and conductors across Europe, the Americas, Africa and Asia, and on many occasions in Poland. He became famous for his interpretations of Johann Sebastian Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Mendelssohn, Mozart, Paganini, Tchaikovsky, Wieniawski, and some composers from the 20th century such as Bela Bartok, Alban Berg, Aram Khachaturian, Sergei Prokofiev, Karol Szymanowski and Jean Sibelius. Szeryng as an artist was also a very active propagator of contemporary music, each year presenting a new piece for violin and orchestra. He handled the first performances of works created by Manuel Ponce, Peter Racine Fricka, Carnago Guarnieri, Rudolfo Halfter, Jean Martinon, Benjamin Lis, Carlos Chavez, Julian Carrel and Roman Halbenstock Ramati. His recordings were 6 times the winners of the Grand Prix du Disque, including concerts by Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Khachaturian, Ponce, Prokofiev, Chavez, Martinon, Sibelius, Tchaikovsky and Lalo's Symphonie Espagnole. Indeed, the Szeryng repertoire was huge, from the Baroque to composers of his day. In 1960, Szeryng was named the Mexican Culture Ambassador, and in 1966, by which time he had moved to Paris, he was designated Honorary Director of the Conservatory of Music in Mexico City, and a Henryk Szeryng Music Festival was held in his honor in Mexico City. He returned to Mexico twice a year and traveled on a diplomatic passport as Mexico's official cultural ambassador, but lived in Paris for 2 decades and then spent his last 5 years in Monaco. In 1970, Szeryng recorded Mozart's complete works for violin and orchestra for Philips Records, which was used as Volume 8 of the complete Mozart edition in 1991. Henryk Szeryng was a special music advisor as a permanent representative of Mexico to UNESCO. He co-organized many international violin contests, including the Henryk Wieniawski contest in Poznan in 1967 as a member of the jury and in 1981 as chair of the jury. Szeryng recorded roughly 250 discs. A standout recording, though, was the world premiere recording of Paganini's Violin Concerto No. 3 in E major. This recording was made in 1971 by Szeryng with the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Alexander Gibson. The concerto had been rediscovered in the late 1960s after being unperformed for over a century following Paganini's death, and it went on to sell more than 150,000 copies. Szeryng had reconstructed the piece from parts held in the archives of Paganini's great-granddaughters. Szeryng died of a cerebral hemorrhage in Kassel, Germany on the 3rd of March 1988. He was buried at Cimetière de Monaco in Monaco, France. The headstone bearing the concluding bars of the Chaconne from Bach's Partita No. 2 for solo violin feature on his grave. The violinist had married only 4 years earlier to a German woman named Waltraud Büscher. Henryk Szeryng ended his career as he started it 55 years before with the Brahms Violin Concerto. What are some comments made by others about this great violinist? Bronislaw Huberman in 1927 said of Szeryng that he had great talent with hands like Jascha Heifetz. That's the ultimate compliment. For some listeners and critics, Henryk Szeryng's steely tenacity and intellectual firepower lurked just behind the glorious surfaces. As pianist Arthur Rubinstein famously stated, Szeryng's playing reduces me to tears. Real music lovers want emotion, great moments which Szeryng's playing gives them. Polish Prime Minister and composer-pianist Ignaz Paderewski described him as radiating so much goodness, so much dignity. The Polish-born Henryk Szeryng was the aristocrat of the instrument, favouring a graceful silky tone and civil on-stage discourse over surface, flash or provocation. He cut a poised, patrician figure matched visually with an unusually high-bowing arm, and saw the arts foremost as a vehicle for diplomacy and charity, from Strings magazine. A note on the generosity of Henryk Szeryng. Szeryng recognised that high-minded talk went only so far. He claimed to have donated 2/3 of his income to charity, and starting in the 1970s gave away several violins from his collection, among them the 1734 Hercules Isai Szeryng Kinnor David Semmel Stradivari, presented to the city of Jerusalem, and a 1683 Andrea Guarneri Sanctae Theresiae, donated to Mexico. Both were to be loaned out to gifted violinists. He also gave benefit concerts for a variety of causes up until his death. Of his many gifts to others, Szeryng said, "Although many people consider that these are terribly altruistic deeds, I believe that there is some selfishness as well in doing this. I feel that there is some kind of simultaneous vibration between myself and those who play the violins, which, let us say, physically belonged to me before, but possession is not only physical." So like many another great musician we could name, Henryk Szeryng was something of an enigma. For all of Szeryng's patrician manner, he could be an idiosyncratic collaborator. During a 1961 tour with the Cleveland Orchestra, he butted heads with the autocratic and exacting George Szell after the violinist reportedly lectured the ensemble about the Brahms concerto. The dispute came to a head at Carnegie Hall when Szell conducted the accompaniment in the concerto so fast that Szeryng struggled to keep up. The orchestra got raves, but Szeryng was consigned to the junk heap, a Cleveland violinist later wrote. Henryk briefly considered dropping Szeryng from his roster. Szeryng's career nevertheless continued to grow along with his diplomatic activities despite that event. What about Szeryng's work ethic? As Szeryng told the Los Angeles Times in 1986, "If my performances have any freshness and spontaneity in them after I've played the work all these many years, it is no miracle. It is only hard work." And now for some comments that Henry Roth has made on Henryk Szeryng. Roth says that Szeryng can be described as playing generally in the Milstein class. His utter determination to the violin was never subjugated to non-musical pursuits. When speaking about living colleagues, he was always kind and generous. He studiously avoided critical personal remarks. You could say a true gentleman and a professional. One cannot help but marvel at his sovereign instrumental mastery and the depth and perception of his musicianship. Every bar has obviously been penetratingly analysed, yet there is no vestige of academic rigidity. Exactitude of rhythm and consistency of his patrician good taste and phrase-making are what characterises his playing. His was a cultured art. And describing his tone, Roth says, "His violin tone radiated inner warmth, calculated to seduce the listener." One of Szeryng's great pleasures was tracking down lost compositions, notably Paganini's Concerto No. 3 in E major. Szeryng said, "I consider music as the noblest language, bringing comfort, joy, inspiration and peace to mankind. I think it's vital that peace be preserved, and if music can help, then let's have music." Just repeating the quote that I mentioned at the outset of the video, echoing the thoughts of others like Daniel Barenboim with his Divan Orchestra, bringing together Jews and Palestinians to play music together. So what of Henryk Szeryng's legacy and awards? Well, the Henryk Szeryng Career Award is a career award that was started by the Henryk Szeryng Foundation and led by Waltraud Szeryng, his wife. It is awarded to young violinists to help them with financial and practical support. In 1994, Vadim Gluzman was the first recipient of the award. The foundation, led by Waltraud Szeryng, also provided support, guidance and performance opportunities to winners. And some awards and recognitions. The Grammy Award for Best Chamber Music Performance with Pierre Fournier and Arthur Rubinstein in 1976 for his Schubert Trios, number 1 and 2. With Pierre Fournier and Arthur Rubinstein for Brahms Trios and Schumann, that was in 1975, and the Grand Prix du Disque in 1959 for the Brahms Violin Concerto with the LSO, conducted by Pierre Monteux, and the Grand Prix du Disque for the Bach Solo Sonatas and Partitas. Szeryng is one of the preeminent interpreters of Bach. On stage, off stage, or behind the scenes, what counted most for Henryk Szeryng were respect, tolerance, good manners, discipline, and order. The Strad magazine. What a code of honour to live by. A true aristocratic violinist. Let's conclude by taking a look at some of the violins that came into the possession of Henryk Szeryng.